The biggest winner of this conflict in the Middle East is Russia. I'm sure that, Russia is going to exploit this situation as much as it possibly can. President Trump is saying that, he feels that NATO's not supporting him, so what's the point of this alliance? And I really do think that the Russians are interpreting this as kind of a test it out. Yeah, come test it out.
Welcome to Talk Eastern Europe Weekly News Roundup, where each week we discuss the latest news and developments in Central and Eastern Europe. My name is Nina Panikova, and I'm joined by the other two co-hosts, Alexandra Karppi and Adam Reichardt. Hi guys, how are you? It's a long time that we've been together like this, all three of us.
Yes. Hello, Nina, and we hope you're feeling better. Welcome back to the podcast.
I think you can hear that I'm not 100%, but actually I quite enjoy the voice.
It's nice to have something different every once in a while for the listeners.
Yes, so it's me, but maybe next week my real voice will be returning, but today I have this one.
Yeah, well, I picked something up as well, so I don't know how you transmitted that across the wavelengths and air lengths, but that's okay. It's the season, last push.
It is the season. It's definitely the season.
Well, busy week as always, guys. But before we get into the news, I just want to remind everyone that we are a Patreon-supported podcast. I know we've been doing a big push on YouTube, which, of course, we do encourage you to watch us there and subscribe so you don't miss any videos. But first and foremost, we are supported by our patrons. So if you like what you are now watching and what you hear week to week, go check us out. You get more bonus content and other perks just about every week. And we've been really pushing to put up more content there as well. So do check it out. We're really, really grateful for all of our patrons who've been so supportive through this transition, I have to say.
Yes, and without the patrons, as you say, we wouldn't be able to do it. So thank you very much. So as this the news roundup episode are part of the weekly podcast or videocast. Hey guys, what have you been following? What is happening in our region this week?
Yeah, what's not happening in this region this week? There's just so much as always happening. I would start with Ukraine. We have usually start with Ukraine. We haven't talked about it so much lately on the podcast, but a lot happening there. I think largely related also to the war that's taking place in the Middle East. We have seen recently some claims that were made by President Zelensky in Ukraine, basically saying that he feels, or it appears to him, that the main condition for U.S. security guarantees, if a peace deal is ever reached, basically involves Ukraine abandoning the Donbas territories. Mm-hmm. Ukraine obviously wants U.S.-backed security guarantees as part of its peace agreement, peace deal, and obviously it would protect against any future aggression. But Russia obviously wants Ukraine to withdraw from the Donbas regions, which is not fully under Russian occupation at this time. This is basically where the front line is. So we've seen that news come out. And last week there was the G7 meeting of foreign ministers, basically where U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked directly this question, why is the U.S. putting pressure on Ukraine to abandon Donbas, abandon its territory? And basically Rubio said that's not the case. And in fact, I think his exact words are, he is lying. So we've seen some tension growing between the U.S. and Ukraine. And I think, further, just on top of that, during that same G7 meeting of foreign ministers, basically Rubio said, when asked about, in terms of providing weapons, defensive weapons, including air defense, particularly Patriot missiles, if that is going to be diverted to the Middle East. And he said it's possible. So I think, we have to really be keeping an eye on this. It's important to recall that, the U.S. doesn't directly give weapons to Ukraine, not since over a year since Trump came back to power. But through an agreement with NATO, basically European countries buy these weapons from the U.S. and then send it to Ukraine for free. And now that's in question, and whether that's actually going to be able to maintain. And then we saw, over the weekend and even in the last days or two, some pretty big attacks, particularly also in Western Ukraine. There was an attack on a historical building, which in fact a building where I once organized a meeting, a discussion. So, Lviv was attacked, and I think the Russians are really testing Ukrainian air defense at the moment and are really looking towards this window, I would say, for them, an opportunity where they are losing capacity to defend the skies because the supplies just aren't coming anymore.
Mm. Yeah, that is very concerning. And of course, like we were discussing this, what will be the impact and what is the impact of the ongoing still war with Iran, Israeli and US war in Iran? And I think we are entering, is it a second month that we are entering of that war? And it's Yeah, and it is still quite fresh, and we already see how much of an impact it has actually on, the most major conflict we've seen in Europe, after the Second World War. So it's really concerning. And I saw Zelensky as well confirming that it really impacts on the weapons that they are defensive weapons that they are receiving in Ukraine. So it's really concerning. But on top of that, I think we need to continue emphasizing that the attacks are ongoing, because I was just, planning my summer trip to the Venice Film Festival that I attend. And I actually came across the news, which is not news this week, but it has been around for maybe 2 weeks already. And you might have heard that the Biennale Festival in Venice is actually considering bringing Russian pavilion back to the festival, which is really concerning. And I mean, I said it's not complete news, but what it gives us is that we are 5th year of the war, and the world is kind of, coming back to normal when it comes to Russia, but Russia still continues being, as we say, a terrorist state and really terrorizing the civilian population of Ukraine, and it will continue doing so. And there's a part of the community that seems to like to return to the normal in a way.
Yeah, and I think I would say, just to add to that, the fact that this war in the Middle East is causing such issues related to energy, oil and gas. I mean, Russia is really going to be pushing on countries who have sanctioned Russian oil and gas over the last 5 years or 4.5 years. They're going to be trying to, push it as an alternative. And, I wouldn't be surprised if some countries decide to go in that direction just because they might not have a choice. We've already seen the U.S. allowing for Russian oil and gas to basically be unsanctioned, at least temporarily. So, we'll see how that further develops. The biggest winner of this conflict in the Middle East is Russia. Yeah, so they're getting a lot out of it.
And have you followed the decisions of the EU as well to postpone the disconnect from the Russian oil? I haven't seen that, but I think there was a discussion as well. What is this going to mean for the EU? Of course, any dependency of some countries on the Russian oil.
Yeah, we definitely will follow up on that, I think. And a lot of EU countries, I mean, like everywhere, I'm sure you're experiencing it as well. The price of fuel is just skyrocketed. I know here in Poland, we're instituting a policy to reduce the taxes on it. So at least we'll bring the price down a bit to help with that. But I'm sure that, Russia is going to exploit this situation as much as it possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
But speaking of the EU, this has, of course, ramifications as far as just direct security. I saw the headline last night. Both Latvia and Estonia confirmed that a Ukrainian drone had wandered into their airspace. And of course, that is now something I think we report every couple of weeks, don't we, guys, when we do the news roundup? But it's concerning. And this is, of course, coming on top of hybrid threats that are constantly escalating on these countries. And soon we'll have an interview with somebody based in Latvia, not just on these issues, but actually on Russian-speaking populations and their view of these matters, which I think is really interesting and really important. They have some new survey data that we'll have a guest to talk about on. But to record that this morning, right after seeing those headlines, for me, just was such a reminder of how real the security situation is for Europe more generally. But it also made me want to ask you, Adam, about the situation in Poland more. We did get a comment on one of our YouTube videos asking exactly this question, in the seemingly increasingly likely scenario where, there could be Russian attacks on Lithuania or on other Baltic states. How do you see a country like Poland interacting? Because it's now really the leader and sort of the last bastion on this topic. How do you see not just Poles reacting, kind of everyday Poles, but really the entire state?
Yeah, I think this is a real question. And I think what's really concerning is the fact that there's also tension in transatlantic relations and the fact that President Trump is saying that, he feels that NATO's not supporting him. So what's the point of this alliance? Maybe we won't support NATO if something happens. And I really do think that the Russians are interpreting this as kind of a test it out. Yeah, come test it out. So in my opinion, I really do believe that we are going to see a scenario. And I'm not going to say it's going to happen, next month or even this year, but it's possible depending on how the situation internationally unfolds. But we can see a scenario where Russia feels it's the time to test NATO's response and whether or not, NATO actually can respond to something. So we've had Carlo Massala, if you remember, a few months back. He wrote the book, If Russia Wins, is basically the scenario where Russia takes Narva in Estonia. And the response is basically that from the U.S. During the NATO summit at the end. I don't want to give it away, but it's basically this is the story, the scenario is that, why are we going to risk ourselves for some small little town in a little country like Estonia? And that's the end. NATO basically is defunct. And I do think this is very realistic. I don't know. I can't say whether I think Poland would not act independently. Yeah, it would try to act within NATO. So anything that's going to happen first is going to be a NATO session, Article 5, and demand for action among the entire alliance. If it falls apart, then I think all the cards are off the table, and nobody knows what will happen after that. Yeah. My prediction is that basically we will see Russia will not try to invade all of the Baltic states and Poland and take land. What it wants to prove is that NATO as an alliance no longer exists. And once that's done, the countries like Poland, frontline states, are just going to invest massively in their own security and defense. And we'll have just growing tensions, and we don't know what direction that would lead to. But that's my assessment from today's standpoint, and unfortunately, it's not a very positive one, but one that I think is very realistic.
And is this something that is talked about quite a bit? Do you think there's, from the perspective of civic preparedness, is this something even on people's minds, or not yet, getting there?
I mean, it comes in waves. So we had I would say a few months ago, basically everybody in Poland received by mail a special booklet on how to prepare. It's basically kind of dual use. So it's not just in case of war, but also in case of natural disaster, in case of, something else could happen. Basically, a small pamphlet of readiness, preparedness. Yeah. Things that we saw back in the U.S. after 9/11, a lot of talk about home preparedness, how to prepare for certain events. So there's a lot of talk about that. I know a lot of people in Poland who have, the kind of the bug out bags, like the ready bags to go. If something happens, you grab it and you leave. And of course, most people who are thinking about these things have some sort of plan in case something happens. So definitely it's talked about, it's thought about, but, it comes in waves. And I would say right now it's at the moment, kind of a low moment where we're not talking about it that much. I think the general assessment from speaking with some sources also in Polish military is that the threat is not currently at its highest, but we have to be ready because it can at any moment, change.
Yeah, and I would also like to, add that you do remember the assessments which came, I think, at the end of 2025 when they said that this might be the last peaceful summer in 2026, and I think it was also French general who said that Russia is really, boosting its military preparation for invading a NATO country. And I mean, and now with the ongoing war with the Middle East, of course, when we discussed as well, how this is actually feeding into also Russia's economy and the oil prices skyrocketing. It's it's becoming, all coming together. Maybe so. We maybe should revisit the booklet and in many places and start to really prepare.
Yeah, it never hurts to prepare for anything. Yeah, I mean, we learned this lessons, I think, also during pandemic time. We dealt with crises, in 2022 when we had all the Ukrainians coming here. So for our people in our region, I think, being prepared is something that we definitely need to be thinking about.
I just remember also the interview that you did, Adam, on also the Russian threat, in NATO countries, where one of the speakers reminded us that actually the Central Eastern Europe, it's not those regions which are unprepared. It's actually the Western countries, often. And I mean, I'm speaking from Brussels, Belgium, it's France, it's those populations who don't feel that the threat is so imminent that it can be, for example, in Poland or Baltic states.
Absolutely. Yeah, threat perception is a big issue that we talk about in these circles, and in Western Europe, among society especially, the perception is very low or even non-existent. Yeah, when you look at what geopolitics discussions are taking place in Western European countries, it's more focused on Middle East than what's happening actually in Russia and Ukraine.
Yes, this is exactly what I was going to say. Is I don't think I've talked much on the podcast about. I was in the U.S. just a couple of weeks ago, and everybody, of course, talking about the Middle East, and it's the idea of having boots on the ground, and I really mean more boots on the ground. It should be emphasized, despite maybe the messaging from Washington to that effect. But it's wildly unpopular, So there's quite a bit of unwillingness to be quote unquote dragged into these conflicts, and to come back to that from being in Europe the last year and a half. The dissonance there is just so strong. Of actually we've we've been at war. And yes, geographically, you maybe are looking at a different set of threats. But I mean, come on, guys, like we have been at war now for 5 years, and to see that total lack of disconnect play out now again and come to light with what's going on in the Middle East, maybe the positive reading is it will, make us think about these things more and confront them, at least, on the US side. But I don't know. I mean, it's a really hard to predict time. So who knows?
Definitely. And I don't want to drag this topic out too much. And then we can talk about this for a long time.
Yeah.
But there's one other element that it needs to be brought up, and it's China. And, the China and Russia could coordinate something. Yeah. Like, China goes for Taiwan, Russia goes for Narva. I mean, this is a realistic scenario. In the US, which is the biggest Western power, is tied down in the Middle East. There will be a powerless moment, I think, for the West. And it will be when we wake up and realize that the world has completely changed. It's already changing, but it's a complete change. Yeah, for those of you out there, we'd love to have your opinions and thoughts. Share them in the, your thoughts in the comments to YouTube video or also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are.
Yeah, maybe we can continue we touched upon a bit on, of course, the energy and what is happening. So I would just, say a few words about the news from Moldova. So Moldova declared energy state of emergency. This means that on March 24, the Moldova's parliament voted 72-1 to declare a 2-month state of emergency in the energy sector after a massive Russian drone strike on Ukraine damaged the high voltage line, which was actually connecting Moldova to the electricity grid to the EU. So while the power is back from the emergency, the situation remains very fragile. They really feel the majority of electricity deficits. So this is just another reminder, that the war in Ukraine is ongoing. And I mean, the electricity sector is being targeted and attacked again by Russia. It impacts also its neighboring countries, such as Moldova.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly an indirect attack on Moldova. Yeah, so right. It's like a huge impact for Moldovan people.
I have to take the mic to talk a bit about Serbia. I think I was good and didn't talk about the Balkans too much on our last news roundup. And I was saving it because we had some local elections coming up and they just took place in 10 municipalities in Serbia on Sunday. We got the usual reports from credible independent election observers that there was some allegations of various forms of fraud and vote buying and things like this, which unfortunately we now expect in Serbia. There was also some reported violence, which was making the rounds of headlines, clashes between, let's say, civically oriented independent observers and also ruling party aligned observers and other quote unquote hooligans that tend to, let's say, come out in full force when there is a test for the ruling party SNS in Serbia. So some polling stations, I don't think anything had to close or there wasn't any major violence, but there was definitely moments where there was questions about safety for voters and things like this. And of course, unsurprisingly, Alexander Vučić, the president, has come out and said, it's been a landslide in every municipality. We came, we saw, we conquered, we got the results we wanted. But I'm seeing analysis a bit to the contrary, where actually the turnout was not what you would expect. I mean, a lot of these municipalities are more rural areas, which have traditionally been a stronghold for the party. But I suppose the numbers, although we're talking just thousands of voters, still the numbers suggest it wasn't quite the landslide that maybe the regime is making it out to be. And this is, of course, important because this is the first electoral test we've had since the massive student-led protests, which are, of course, still ongoing. So for me, this is very big news out of the region. I don't know if either of you have been following it, probably not as painstakingly as I have, but it's important. It's a very, very important test, I think, for the ruling party right now.
I was in Serbia recently and there was a lot of anticipation for these local elections. Even though it might seem quite small, it was 10 municipalities. But for everybody was, as you said, kind of electoral test of the popularity of SNS, the governing party, but as well the test how far they can go when it comes to manipulate the elections and how come they can go when it comes to attacking exact attacks, and trying to kind of intimidate people, threaten people, and what they can do with a view, that there might be general elections happening this year as well in Serbia. So I think that was a lot of anticipation in civil society. I know that the local independent electoral monitors were quite concerned about the threats that they received as well previously as themselves. And the issue is, of course, that there is always a lack of international electoral observers. And even though they are trying to call, also in preparation for the general elections for those from OSCE, from the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, to come into the country, they are very, very much aware that the state is going to disrupt that and is going to, issue the invitations last minute, so they cannot do the long-term observation and so on. So, so it was a test, I feel, also in the way that it was done. And maybe also for the Hungarian elections, I don't know.
Yeah,
these are
who knows?
the big elections that will be happening quite soon.
But it's really interesting, Nina. I mean, you mentioned that there were no international observers. I mean, this is true in a sense, but actually I saw a really interesting story on Balkan Insight drop about actually a couple of MAGA, like far-right organizations from the U.S. sent a couple of quote-unquote observers, so not accredited, not legitimate, to go observe the elections with this increasingly well-known GONGO, so more government-aligned faux NGO called the Center for Social Stability. This is a very interesting organization that has also been involved in organizing pro-government protests and other, let's say, pro-government events. So they've been a little bit of a far-right coalition coming to quote-unquote observe. I'm not sure what they ended up finding. I do know a lot of the members are linked to some very nasty rhetoric, like some fascist circles, and then some lighter, run-of-the-mill MAGA stuff like anti-LGBTQ and, Greenland should be the US and those kinds of narratives. So really interesting story. If we remember, we can link it so you all can read it. I thought it was a really very, very interesting find.
I mean, it really makes me think about, also when Russia was sending this observers to the elections, in occupied parts of Ukraine once upon a time, which were also like these conservative pro-Russian figures from Slovakia, or from other countries, also trying to show that there is legitimacy beyond what is happening, and everything is happening in line with international standards. So, I mean, it's fascinating that we see that
they try
happening.
real hard to present it as, true, yes, but we know that it's like, it's definitely facade, yeah. I also read recently a report in The Guardian that the U.S. State Department is providing some sort of guidance to all of workers in embassies and consulates that they should be basically trying to promote pro-American local organizations. And we don't know what that really means, whether it's like something grassroots or if it's actually looking at kind of supporting more right-wing organizations like you mentioned, Alexandra. But definitely
the strategy, right?
Yeah, well, we've heard a lot that this is kind of like what's the direction that the federal government of the U.S. would actually, in place of kind of USAID type of activities, it's going to be about supporting more conservative, pro-Christian value types of organizations. And I'm sure we will see more of that coming out too.
Oh, yeah.
With that, should we maybe stay in the region and just remind our listeners and viewers to watch and listen to the main interview that you, Alexandra, did for this week, right?
Yeah. This was the interview I did with Gresa Hasa on the situation in Albania. A couple of weeks ago, there were really violent anti-corruption protests, and I was having some issues wrapping my head around it, honestly. I mean, are these, some kind of mass demonstration like we saw in Czechia just last week, or Serbia historically? How do we understand this? But she gave us, I think, the real insight, which I won't give too much of it away, but we should be a bit skeptical of the origins of these movements. So very interesting for me. Take a look.
Very interesting. We will definitely share a link at the end of this episode. If you're on YouTube, you'll be able to just click right to it. But we'll also put the link down in the show notes below. And I think maybe that's a good time to wrap up this week's news roundup. We talked a lot about security and the various wars and geopolitics that are in the region, but we also looked at the Balkans. So it's always, a good run around of the region, what's happening here. And I think, before we go, just want to say we invite all of our viewers and listeners to make sure that you subscribe to the podcast wherever you are. Make sure you can get notified when there's new episodes. You can check us out at talkeasterneurope.eu, where we have all the archive of the previous episodes. So for those of you who are new joining us, we recently switched to YouTube. We were just an audio-only podcast. So if you want to go back and listen to like 250 episodes of our previous podcasts, they're all available there. And we also have a Facebook group, which is under Talk Eastern Europe Podcast, and you can come and share your thoughts there as well. Love to hear your views on security and whether or not Europe is ready for any sort of provocation and what you think about that. And then, of course, we have the patrons. which we normally recently would have done a shout out where we said everybody's name, but because we have so many amazing supporters out there, it became really long. And so we decided, since we're on YouTube, we decided to do just a screenshot of all of our patrons where we give their names, and that's our shout out, and we say thank you very much. So hopefully our wonderful editor who's with us, Miłosz, is putting the names of our patrons there right now, and we just want to say thank you so much to all of you and for your support. It's actually, without your support, we would not have been able to launch the YouTube channel that we have right now. So we're still working on it, but we're really excited, and I think it's going really well. As of today, we have over 230 some subscribers on YouTube, which is for 2 weeks pretty incredible. And we're getting a lot of exposure, and of course, we have the podcast on all of the audio platforms, and so you cannot not find us. We are everywhere.
Absolutely. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, Miłosz, for helping us with the transition as well, doing all of the editing and production for us. And thank you both. It's good to be back among the three of us.
Yes, and check out the interview and see you next week.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll be back real soon.
Bye.
Bye.